Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mendez. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and today we're doing another Tale of the 500 Kingdoms, which is a series that I will not be reading in any particular order after having read the first one. There are some books in this series that require a certain degree of ordering, but even then, this is mostly just standalones, so I'm not really worrying about that. So here we are with Beauty and the Werewolf, and the lead character of the first book, Elena Clovis, now Godmother Elena, does appear in this, but she is effectively a tertiary character. This is instead the story of Isabella Beauchamp, who starts off, as Elena Clovis did, in the vestiges of a Cinderella story. You know, as I said in the last one, this is a very, very fractured fairy tales concept of a world in which you have this force known as the tradition, which effectively makes people follow preset plot lines, that if a story is popular, then it will make you follow the plot line if your life starts to seem like that particular plot line. Elena Clovis, not Elena Clovis, pardon me, Isabella Beauchamp, Bella for short. Bella has a stepmother and two stepsisters, but what happened in this is not only was there no prince for her to marry, the interesting thing in this case is that what she did when her stepmother moved in was she undercut her stepmother. She took away her stepmother's authority, made herself mistress of the house, and then at that point was able to avoid her stepmother turning wicked because her stepmother didn't have the power, and so rather than being wicked and awful, she was simply vain, self-centered, and inconvenient. The stepsisters, without their mother being there to effectively egg them on into being awful, became essentially good-natured, if a little bit silly and, you know, a little over the top. And this is because Bella effectively, when her stepmother moved in, she kept control. One gets the feeling that it may be partly because she was a control freak, but the main thing is that by doing so, she forced the Cinderella story into abeyance by, in effect, sheer force of will, and didn't even realize she was doing it, because this is, in the course of this book, is when she discovers the existence of the tradition. And what happens is she goes out visiting a woman in the woods who's known as Granny, because this is, Granny here is being used in the traditional format of, you know, your local wise woman who is known as grandmother, not because she is your grandmother, but because grandmother is a term of respect. In this case, Granny. She goes out to visit Granny while wearing a red cloak and gets attacked by a werewolf. This is a book which is, in a lot of ways, this series, of course, is the epitome of take a drink when you identify another, you know, fairy tale or folk tale. In this case, it starts with the hints of Cinderella, shifts into some Little Red Riding Hood because she is on her way home from Granny's when she is attacked by a wolf, then becomes Beauty and the Beast because she is basically effectively kidnapped and forced to live with a werewolf, a duke who is living alone but for his illegitimate half-brother out in the middle of nowhere, and she's not allowed to leave because she got bitten by a werewolf, so the king of the country that they live in has basically said, well, we need to lock you up just for a couple months to be sure that you're not going to suddenly start turning into a wolf at the full moon either. In the course of this book, one of the things that happens is that Eric, the gameskeeper, who is kind of a lot of a jerk at the start of the book. In fact, he's so much of a jerk that when he turns out to be the villain at the end, you're almost surprised because he seems too obvious. He's really, really awful at the start of the book. Uh, Implications of sexual harassment, well, genuine sexual harassment, but suggestions that range between sexual assault and forcing women to have sex with him as, favors in exchange for various favors. He doesn't come across as a very nice guy, but at the same time, Isabella is very sympathetic to the fact that because he is a bastard son, the problem with bastard sons, and this is a long-term historical one, is they really, in a lot of ways, only have as much rank as their parents, usually male parents, allow. And so, Eric is older than Sebastian, his younger brother, the actual official duke, but does he get anything? No. He doesn't get the education, he doesn't get the respect, all he gets is everybody looking down their noses at him, so he turns out kind of angry and bitter and jealous, and it's one of those things that it's probably at least partially the fault of Sebastian's father, but Eric becomes a very unpleasant person, but at the same time, there's a period in the book during which he sort of agrees to take Isabella on as a pseudo-apprentice, that in effect she will go riding with him when he goes on his rounds as the gamekeeper. That is, the person who tries to keep things under control. It's sort of like a forest ranger-y kind of job. The idea is to sort of keep people from hunting too much in the Duke's woods, because they are the Duke's woods and they are not public spaces. And to keep people from overhunting the area, to just sort of keep things under control, and she's sort of to project herself as being his apprentice, at which point she starts to notice that the tradition, having seen her becoming friends with him and going out with Eric a lot, starts to pressure her into maybe falling for his blandishments, and she resists that, so she starts doing herself up, trying to pretend to be, make herself into, the young woman pretending to be a man, such that the man that she is going after doesn't even realize that she is a woman, and, so she sort of forces things in that direction, but you can see the various vestiges of stories of young women who dress up as men to follow men into other things. Those vestiges also sit there in the course of this. This is, by the way, published by Harlequin, and as such, this is a romance. No, she doesn't wind up with Eric. Eric is, in fact, I'm going to give it away, because it's not that much of a mystery, really, to tell you that, yes, Eric is actually the villain of this piece. But it's nonetheless really, really interesting, because Mercedes Lackey is telling, it's a fairly standard story. There's nothing in here that is particularly outre in terms of romance novel, but it is interesting to watch as she sort of walks past all of these stories and has them sort of brush briefly into the plot line enough that you can see how all of the different ways this could go, the different stories that it could follow that are well-worn stories that we know. In the end, of course, she turns out to have some talent for magic and winds up falling in love with the Duke, who, by the way, is also a magician. And, they wind up setting up to a nice, and they lived happily ever after. And in the meantime, though, Elena Clovis is seen, this time, not from the inside, as in the first book, but from the outside, that we're seeing Elena Clovis from the distance of somebody who only knows her as the distant godmother. That is, a woman whose job is to handle the kingdom's safety from a magical perspective, that her job is to keep things ticking over, and that she is, in some ways, very fundamentally ruthless. You know, we see Elena Clovis and the fairy godmother from the perspective of somebody learning this, from the perspective of somebody who agonizes over these decisions. You know, the decision to find a way to keep a girl from turning into the Rapunzel story and instead change that into the Princess and the Pea, but she knows that at 16 that girl will have to leave her home and will never see her parents again, that her parents will lose their daughter. Not to death, but they will never see her again after that point. And it's hard to do something that she knows will do this, even though she knows that it's still the best option. But in Beauty and the Werewolf, Isabella doesn't get to see that agonizing. She doesn't get to see the internal debate. She doesn't get to see the questioning on the part of Elena that we know from the first book she must have been doing. Instead, we get the young woman who is aware that the fairy godmother and the king of this country will drop her and Duke Sebastian off on a desert island if they think they have to protect their people, that they will kill them if they have to protect their people, and that she is going to have to deal with that fear and that loneliness and that uncertainty because, this is the situation she's in, but her situation, while important, is not important enough that she can't be dropped down a well if that's the best choice for the greater good. It's a very, very scary realization for her because, of course, you get the feeling reading this that Bella is a control freak, ever so slightly, and this whole situation is entirely out of her control. It is just absolutely wrested out of her control over and over and over again, and she spends this whole book grasping for some sort of control over her situation. And so it's very, very interesting to, in this one, see that other side of things, to see the fairy godmother not as a person that we know that we are seeing on a daily basis whose struggles we understand, but as somebody who is a distant figure whose struggles we don't understand. So I think that's everything, unless somebody wants me to give chapter and verse on, the entire plot, but I'm pretty sure I've already told everybody the important parts of the plot, so, this, as I've said before, this is an all-spoiler zone because I don't like playing the game of let's talk about a book while not being able to talk about the book, because that seems foolish. Anyways, so, yeah, I think that's all about this particular installment in the Tale of the 500 Kingdoms, and I will see you all next week.